This is Robert, a boy whose life we have been privileged to watch from the time he was 2.5 until the moment of completing this film some 5 years later. And here are some scenes of Robert in action to help you get acquainted and recognize him when you see him later with other children.
A boy of charm and warmth, a boy of normal ups and downs, and normal human problems of development and adjustment. His particular problems are partly his very own, and partly the typical problems of the suburban middle-income family.
Our purpose is to show how one child behaves and how he has grown and changed in his early childhood. Such an understanding of Robert may help understanding all children. He may remind you of other children you have known, or perhaps of the child you have been. Robert's problems are not a different kind from those of any other child. They differ in organization and degree. This bouncing, puppyish play has for its only purpose the sheer joy of active muscles and senses, delight in tumbling and tussling, delight in leaves and sunlight and earth and other children.
This kind of joyous, scattered play has always seemed to be one important side of the picture of Robert. He has to be sure of getting his share of the teacher's affection. We shall have to see why this is especially important for him. Robert shows clumsiness and uncoordinated haste. He is energetic, but sprawling. He seems better coordinated from the waist up than from the waist down. He lacks the speed, skill, and grace of many of the other children of his age. Robert half skins the cat. He is foot heavy.
It is rather surprising that a boy who delights in activity and shows a flair for vigorous, outgoing use of his body should be so clumsy when coordinated action is required. We should expect that a clumsy boy will feel threatened and angry in situations where other children are graceful and effective.
And clumsiness may sometimes be thought of as the result of anger and aggression turned against one's self. But here you can see again how much fun Robert can have, especially in sprawling, puppy-like play with other children. You can see again his high spirits, his driving energy, and his awkwardness.
It is like Robert to show a swift, explosive anger when people or things get in his way. He expresses his anger with violent, scattered, all-over movements. His warm anger is of a piece with his warm, friendly affection.
Robert, as we have already seen, enjoys the other children. He likes to be with them and play with them, to tussle with them and to share experiences with them. His energy and warmth and enthusiasm make him attractive to other children, too.
But he is too distractible, too scattered, and too wrapped up in his own concerns to be a successful leader except for brief periods. And even here, he winds up leading from behind.
This is a firehouse, and the firemen are resting between fires.
Being a fireman, and a fire engine too, gives lots of scope for shouting and squealing, And these are constant accompaniments to most of Robert's play. His voice has always been a sensitive index to his feelings, with a pronounced quaver and stutter when he is upset.
But Robert's days have an electric quality. He swings in black and white contrast from sheer joy to deep gloom and thunderous hostility. He is not merely a child of wholehearted vigor and energy. He is also capable of explosive violence, direct, wholehearted, and ruthless.
We may suppose that such violence reflects stored-up tensions and frustrations. In Robert, these tensions produce open aggression rather than withdrawal or some other response, as in the case of many other children.
Notice the grim mouth and the sudden flurries of violent movement.
With finger paints, different children act very differently. Here is a boy on whom convention has already clamped down firmly. He cannot bear to participate in such a messy activity. Even with the coaxing and example of his teacher and another child.
Robert, on the contrary, gives it everything he's got. He uses the paint with tremendous vim in a typically aggressive, violent way. There is evidence of strong sensory interest in his enjoying the feel and even the smell of the paints, but this is secondary to his brisk, slashing motor approach. He clings consistently to dark colors.
He is not at all concerned about getting paint all over himself or even the wall. But he doesn't have the relaxed delight in contact and texture that Alice showed. Just as Robert ignores the boundaries of the paper, he tends to override limits that are set in everyday situations.
This is an experiment, more accurately a projective method, in which an inexpensive jar of cold cream, like the finger paints, gives us an opportunity to compare the dominant interests and the different ways of approaching life that characterize different children.
Robert plunges in at once without hesitation or restraint, and seems to enjoy handling it, smelling it, feeling it. He scoops out large quantities. See how different this child's approach is. It is typical of Robert that he spreads the cold cream over a large area. He even skates in it. While other children may be reluctant even to remove any cold cream from the jar.
The outstanding feature of Robert's behavior is the way he continually pushes the boundaries of his freedom to the very utmost. He is with some difficulty persuaded not to festoon the walls.
Robert now insists on having a second jar.
The more freedom Robert has, the more he seems to want. It is important in our understanding of Robert to recognize that he always has to test the limits of every situation, to see how far he can possibly go, to challenge the adult.
Just as in this situation, he is always likely to respond to a release from prohibitions by an aggression that increases until he is stopped short. This is often seen in vigorous children when they are first freed from too many restraints.
Notice his slack-lipped, glazed expression and tense posture. which indicate the anxiety that usually follows his displays of aggression.
Robert's mornings in the nursery school were full of conflicts like these.
The tornado was always threatening. No one knew just where, just when, or even just why it would strike. Will this little girl be ignored, or hugged, or slapped?
Teachers had to stand by watchfully waiting for affection to be suddenly replaced by aggression. Robert's aggression was unpredictable, and to his wise teachers, this suggested that the cause was something deep within Robert. This loving and well-loved boy bears within him an idling hostility always ready to burst out. Often his emotions appear to be expressed backwards. He attacks most violently those he loves the best.
And after events like these, just as after he broke the cold cream jar, will come the clear evidence of Robert's feeling of guilt and anxiety. This is a projective method to study the relation between an immediate frustration and hostility. After Donald has been given some interesting toys to play with, the experimenter begins to interfere with his free use of them. Which is mine? Which is nicer, yours or mine? Now I'll play with them, and you watch. Finally, the toys are put away, and an uninteresting stick is substituted. Again, in less rapid succession than appears here, new toys are given the child. Again, he is denied an uninterrupted enjoyment of them, and the uninteresting stick is substituted.
The stick, of course, represents the less interesting aspects of life, and it can be attacked, or avoided, or used as a weapon. Now let us watch Robert in this situation, omitting the frustrating toy units and selecting some portions of the stick units only to emphasize the resulting hostility.
Robert is the most violent of any of the children who have taken part in this procedure. Here, too, guilt and self-punishment follow aggression. Hit me, says Robert. Hit me hard with all your might.
Like most children we know, Robert seeks comfort. He seeks relief from his anxiety and uncertainty in any way that is open to him. One comfort pattern is a delight in routines. Robert not only falls in with the simple, dependable regularities of nursery school life, but he overemphasizes them.
Especially in his early years in nursery school, he was constantly heard in his rather tremulous voice saying juice time, washing time, putting away time.
Rules were his safety. Routines were his joys.
Another comfort pattern is oral activity, which is common in children and even adults, as a symbolic return to the security of babyhood.
Robert is not a thumbsucker, but as we suggested already, He takes an unusual pleasure in eating, talking, drinking. He consumes snow of all vintages.
Robert, with the homemade wetting doll, gives us a clue to the important early part of his life.
He was not weaned from the bottle until he was 1.5 years old. Oh, how he loved that bottle, his mother tells us. So much did he love the bottle that when it was taken away, he refused to drink milk from a cup for 4 solid months.
He accepts with enthusiasm the attractions of infancy, and his own behavior becomes more and more babyish. He soon drops the intermediary doll. I put it in my mouth.
In spite of such pressure as semi-forcible weaning, Robert, as we have seen, is well nourished. Some children under the same conditions turn in upon themselves and placidly accept the pressure or lose their appetites and become feeding problems.
Children's play in this projective technique with the experimental miniature life toys helps us understand how the world looks in their eyes. We may learn whether the private world that is the psychological environment of each child is friendly or hostile, orderly or casual, simple or complicated. This scion of a sports-loving family appropriately makes the horse thoroughly at home, even to a good hot tub. The entire collection of household furniture and doll people seems too complicated and too oppressive, and Robert goes far away with a small boat. Perhaps it is fanciful to suggest that this is the 4-year-old equivalent of leaving home to run away to sea. At any rate, let us see now what he is turning his back on.
This is the family into which Robert will soon be born. In these scenes of his family life, you must endow these dolls with the appropriate drama and action. Robert's parents are about 40 and have been married almost a dozen years. They both have professional careers.
His mother, sewing tiny garments, is a friendly, hearty woman. His father, more reserved and wrapped up in his work. Here he is, a busy commuter, catching up on the family bills. Robert's mother says of herself that she is too tense and too busy with her job. But she adds, "I would rather be busy than playing bridge like my suburban neighbors."
The family income and small house also maintain the mother's parents. The grandfather is a nervous, thin old gentleman, often depressed or extremely irritable, and here, as usual, demanding everyone's attention. Grandmother is an invalid who suffers from heart trouble.
Robert comes into an already crowded household, geared to the needs of adults, but with the compensating richness of life in a large family. Thus, a baby makes his presence more than normally felt. His mother holds him crying on her lap and is tense with the awareness of the other's disapproval.
For the mutual protection of Robert and of the adults, his mother is taking him away. An outsider knowing the situation can predict greater difficulties, more tension, and the need for more maternal intervention between Robert and the rest of the family when he is older.
At the age of about 3, Robert is banging blocks on the floor. He is a small boy bursting with a small boy's energy, and an outsider is again aware that his activity will not fit smoothly into the crusted pattern of older personalities. Robert himself is becoming dimly aware of this, and of the power he has to irritate and upset the household. Everyone in the family is fond of Robert. It is no one's fault, but it is a fact that Robert is in a tense and crowded situation.
Robert sees very little of his father except on Sundays, and attempts at relaxation are broken by Robert's insistent demanding to sit on his lap, pestering to have the funnies read to him, and so on and on. Later, a close tie was formed between Robert and his father, but not until Robert was old enough to share an interest in tools and carpentry, and the family moved to a larger house.
Robert's mother has to hurry so much. She has to rush Robert to school in the morning before her own work. She dashes home with him at noon during her lunch hour, and then hastens back to work. Robert feels this extra pressure, and it is part of the tension that he naturally resists, and which shapes his personality. The mother welcomed the opportunity to give Robert the relaxation and fun of mornings at a good nursery school from the time he was 2.5.
The grandmother feels that she, too, should take a hand in bringing up Robert with his parents away so much. But Robert feels the erratic nature of her discipline, and feels also her weakness and uncertainty.
His mother has asked her not to say no to Robert, as he is stronger than the grandmother, and she can't handle him physically.
Robert's grandfather, who died when Robert was 4, had very positive and repressive ideas about the place of a child in a family. Many children can cope with this and thrive on it. The difficulty for Robert is his grandfather's unpredictable behavior. One moment, he is loving and playful, and the next moment, bored or furious with Robert.
These keynotes of inconsistency and irritability have their strong effects on Robert, and one unhappy result is a mutual teasing relation between him and his grandfather. Here, Robert is stealthily slipping into the room to turn on the radio and startle his grandfather. This was repeated several times, until his grandfather completely lost his temper and spanked him.
This pattern of gradually building up to an emotional blow-up occurs often. As his teacher commented, Robert had to work hard to get stopped. There was a constant working up to emotional crises. In this scene, Robert is being put to bed by his mother, and a moment later, he appears downstairs. On this occasion, which was typical of many situations, he got out of his crib 25 times until he was finally spanked and the boundary firmly set.
The maid, who is actually in charge of Robert much of the time, is blustering and ineffective. She alternates between indulgence and anger. When his mother comes home, the maid turns Robert over to her with relief and a list of Robert's misdemeanors.
Robert himself, when he is 4.5, shows us how large punishment and restraint loom in his life. Now he is not turning his back on the miniature life toy version of home. Since we last saw him playing with these toys, the family situation has improved, and there is less crowding and tension. Robert himself is older and more confident.
The mommy spanks the baby who does not stay in bed. Robert shows how exaggerated the punishing aspects of life look. I'll step on the baby until he is dead. We have seen the same emphasis on punishing in Robert's own anxieties, following his own real aggressions. He says sometimes in playing with other toys, "The teacher kills Robert," ascribing to the teacher the extravagant punishment that seems appropriate to him.
Here, too, the crowded home situation is reflected in the close, tight lining up of the furniture. And Robert asks repeatedly, "Is this the maid?" Only Maid and Mommy and Baby appear by name.
Consider, too, how this child's problem is complicated by the moral burden that is beyond his years to carry. From the time he was 2, his father would offer him candy when he came home at night. Robert could have it, if he told his father he had been a good boy. Here we can take part in his dilemma. He recalls that day's bad deeds. He thinks again of the candy and his father's approval. What does he say to his father?
Such a response, then, as we saw with the stick, is not surprising in a child who is both emotionally active and physically vigorous, who has been encroached upon and is therefore on his guard. This sort of open expression of hostility is frequent in children who doubt the possession of a really free life space and who are constantly testing out unclear limits of adult restrictions. Robert's aggressive behavior may be understood as a strong, defensive counterattack.
With this in mind, it is possible to understand the outstanding features of Robert's first year in nursery school, when he was not yet 3.
All this was reported by Robert's teacher on his first day in school, and was fully confirmed by later observations. One other characteristic that was noted in Robert's first year in school is worth stressing. A cyclic alternation between cheery, jolly, blissful days and sultry, gloomy periods of tension shown in violence or occasionally in apathy.
There was also frequent mention of Robert as timid or fearful, with a special fear of loud noises, traits which later almost disappeared. Let's meet in the middle. How can my car pass? This set of projective techniques, called blocking games, suggests what children will do when faced with playful obstacles.
In the second game, the experimenter says, "My doll stops your car. What happens?" This child gives in completely, even enthusiastically, to the experimenter.
This boy thoughtfully devises a live and let live solution.
While Robert shows us the defensive counterattack in action. He responds with extravagant violence, even to a symbolic and abstract frustration like this one, because he is expressing a cumulative, displaced aggression. In the light of what we have seen, we can now understand better why a consistent, dependable affection is important to him.
Robert seeks acceptance of himself, and his teacher meets his need, not for approval or kisses as a reward for being good, but for assurance that he is valued, that he is loved, regardless of his behavior, that even adults who discipline and control him do not turn against him. Like all children, he must be valued in terms of who he is, not for what he does or does not do.
Robert's teacher has helped him handle his aggressions, too. We have seen how his own hostility bothers him, makes him anxious. Unlike some other children, for him there is no value in release and expression of aggression. He is too worried and afraid of himself. He needs to be stopped, and stopped without the demoralizing feeling that he is bad and unloved.
He responds to direct handling, to positive, cheerful commands. His teacher has adroitly used his own emphasis on rules and routine, and his delight in formulas.
Robert's teacher built upon his fondness for rules, and when Robert was ready, helped him toward a freedom from rules. By the end of nursery school, he enjoyed routine without being possessed by it.
He could say, "It don't matter, do it."
He needs adult attention and affection, and responds warmly to it. And his relation with his teacher, which was so important in helping him to clarity and calm, was compounded of love and affection on both sides, of wisdom and understanding, of an appreciation of Robert's warm humor and poetic and vivid turns of speech.
"I'm hot," Robert says. "I'm meat in the oven." Or, "We're on a high, rocky mountain place where you can see the faraway mountains."
Little of the old compulsiveness remained, and his voice was now more serene, with almost no stutter, a good sign of increasing inner stability and clarity.
Robert's first period of strife and stress, the first adolescence of the preschool years, is coming to an end.
A year after he has left nursery school, Robert and his teacher meet again. Robert is leaving the preschool age, the age of many alternatives, the age when a boy is both overdependent and eager for independence. One moment very mature, the next extremely babyish, sometimes boyish, sometimes girlish, sometimes affectionate and constructive, at others appallingly destructive and antisocial.
Now they are both enjoying reminiscences of undergraduate days.
You ever feel like doing that to your teacher? No. You ever feel like beating her up? Yeah.
The balloon experiment is a projective method used to study the aggressive impulses that children carry around with them. There is no frustration and no aggression of anyone else's to which to react.
Some children who are not aggressive break no balloons at all. They are simply not interested in the idea of breaking. Other children, who are also not particularly aggressive, are like Terry. They like the fun of breaking balloons, but they are easy and casual about it.
I like how they pop.
Do you like how they pop? Did you ever pop any? You want to pop some of these? Is it fun to break them?
Yes.
Is it naughty to break them? Is it naughty to break balloons?
Aggressive children also show at least two varieties of behavior. One child will act as though he had been released from a gun. He will smash the balloons with gusto, with almost lustful aggression. Other aggressive children are like Robert. They continually refer to balloons in terms of breaking, but do not permit themselves to do so. The strength of their resistance to breaking suggests that they are working hard to hold in check equally strong impulses to do so.
If you step on them, will they break?
I think so. Do you want to try it?
No.
Why not?
I want to make a big bang.
Robert, in refusing to break balloons, shows again his old fear of loud noises, but he is overemphasizing it. He is using it as a rationalization. He uses others too, such as the expense of the balloons, and he finds ways of delaying the breaking by measuring the balloons. When the experimenter does break one, Robert is anxious and accepts some of the responsibility.
Would you like me to break one?
No! You know why?
Why?
Because I hate to use the bango.
Is it all right if one breaks by accident, by mistake?
Just can't help it.
Is that all right then?
Yes. As when you break one, I break one, I just can't help it.
Some children like to. Did you know that? Some children like to break lots of balloons.
But you know why I think it's a waste of money to break them?
Well, these are here just for breaking, so you can break any ones of these you want. And I have some more outside for later.
Can I break this one?
Mm-hmm.
Can I break this one?
Mm-hmm.
Can I break this one?
Mm-hmm.
Break this one?
Mm-hmm.
Break this one?
Mm-hmm.
This one?
Yeah.
Break that one? That two, break that one, break your one,
Yeah.
break my one,
Do you want to?
break everyone,
Yeah.
break everything for one.
Would you like to break every single one?
I'd like to break one.
All right.
Which is the tiniest one do you think?
I think that's the tiniest one.
Well, let's measure. Let's measure. I'll take this first.
Oh, my.
Woo!
What happened? Whose broke?
Yours.
Well, that's too bad. Is it?
Mine!
Was that fun?
I just didn't like the noise. That mine broke, but I
Did you break it?
No, I just. You want to pick it up and. Oh.
It is important that in Robert's second year at nursery school, he behaved in just this way with the balloons. Yet this was at a time that Robert was at his most violent, when he was described as a naked, roaring force at home and in the nursery school. That is, he kept talking about breaking the balloons, but each time he was invited to do so, he changed the subject, invented rules, or avoided doing so.
From this, it was possible to predict a decrease of aggression, to predict the ability to keep his impulses under control, to predict the behavior that Robert began to show in the next year, ushering in the end of Robert's most turbulent days.
The actual calming down is also shown by the dramatic contrast between Robert's earlier attack on the experimenter in the blocking game and his behavior at 6.
Let's meet in the middle. Now, how can my car pass? How can my car pass?
Mine's stuck onto yours.
What happened?
I think I'll have to pull yours. Go around the bush.
In the spring of the year he was 7, we now see Robert smoothly adjusting to the first grade of a fine public school. Robert, as we know, values a clear-cut situation with definite, simple, consistent rules. But this is a skillfully taught class, with a teacher who knows that children are not simply vessels to be held as still as can be while knowledge is poured down their passive throats. In a more rigid school, too, Robert would now fit in, would be a good boy. But such a school would put on him the great burden of restraining not only his aggression, but all his healthy, outgoing energy. And this would be done at the great personal price of accentuating the compulsiveness, the overconformity, the emphasis on rules, which Robert has to an even greater degree than most 7-year-olds.
But here is Robert, still with a great capacity for fun, still delighting in horseplay, still excitable and noisy. Is he still inflammable and quick to strike out? Ouch! An accidental kick. Will there be assault and battery as in the old days? Robert keeps a tight grip on himself. The storm is subsiding. You can see some signs of the internal battle between Robert and Robert. Seven-year-olds are legal experts on the rules of games, and so quarrels are frequent.
Again we see that Robert keeps the peace. The conflict is arbitrated by the teacher. Watch Robert, especially his hands. There are many signs that in spite of outward control, there is still much inner tension. In fact, Robert's new teacher even thinks of him as over-controlled, as a child who is reserved and conceals his feelings, evidence of the great change in Robert. Understanding, intelligent teachers, his mother's fond, firm support, more space and time for Robert at home, all these have helped him pass the turmoil of his first adolescence.
But we know that Robert is an emotionally vulnerable child, and that what the future will bring is very uncertain. Because he is very sensitive to outside pressure, very much will depend on how calm or strained the home and school situations will be.
But we have a right to feel glad for Robert. Several paths were open to him. He might have become cruel and violent and bitterly antisocial. He might have become tense and terrified. But it looks as though he is on the right road.